Hello and welcome to the Parents Podcast, brought to you by UCAS. This is the essential guide to your child's journey and application into university. And today we're talking about a big subject at a time which will be really exciting for your child when it comes to going to university. It can be exciting for you, but there can also be some fears as well, and maybe questions that you might have. Well, today we are going to answer some of those with the help of my guest on today's episode. I am joined by Suzanne Alderson, who's an author, a mentor, a speaker, and the founder of Parenting Mental Health. Hi, Suzanne. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me, John.
Tell me a bit about yourself to start with, because you have a story which may resonate with people, it may not, but it's an incredibly personal start for how you have come into this world.
Yeah, my daughter was being bullied at school when she was 14, and it led to her mental health declining really significantly, and she actually ended up attempting suicide, which meant that she couldn't go to school, she couldn't do all the things that other 14, 15, 16-year-olds were doing. And at the time, we wondered what that would mean for education and things like that. Obviously, we wanted to keep her alive. That was the primary kind of focus for us. But actually, she ended up, after 2 years out of school, going to college, and she ended up going to university, which is partly why I'm here today. So just to talk a little bit about that. And she's now 24, so it's a little bit in the past, but yeah, it's a really challenging time, and I think something that more and more parents are experiencing, that decline in mental health, even if it's not to the point of suicide.
Since that, you've been involved in all sorts. As I mentioned, you're a speaker, you've written a best-selling book as well. So this is something which you felt that you wanted to go and share your experiences to help others, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I first found out that my daughter was considering ending her life, because that was the only option that she felt that she had, because people hadn't listened to her, including me, I realised that there was absolutely no support for parents. Yet we are the ones who are there in the middle of the night, 24 hours a day. And so I decided that if we made it through, I was sitting on the floor of her bedroom at 3 a.m, wondering if I was the only person in the world going through this, and just realised that I couldn't possibly be. There must be other people like me. And so about a year after she first attempted suicide, I set up a community for parents. And since then, my work has all been about empowering parents, helping to skill them, helping them to connect with each other, and supporting them through really challenging experiences, because I really do believe that parents are the real key to helping our children and young people through some of these challenging times.
And can it feel quite lonely then, if you're not a part of a community like that, as a parent going through that, when your child goes to university, trying to work out how the world works, a world in which they're much further away? I guess having a community to bring people together, does that help you feel supported, I suppose?
I think it does. I think for any parent, whether their child has struggled or not, whether this is the sort of the pinnacle of the dream of educational excellence, it's a really challenging time, because it's all new. Unless you've been through it with a child before, if your child's going to university for the first time, it's all new. And there feels this sort of sense of pressure on you to make sure that everything goes well and everything goes right, and you integrate them into university life, and you've got the lanyard, and you know where you're going for your lectures, and they know how to budget. I mean, from a parent's perspective, as well as from a young person's perspective, but from a parent's perspective, there's such a huge amount. And I think we can tend to lean into those sort of practical parts of parenting then around the tick box. What do I take? How many saucepans? Do they need a doorstop? Have they got a bottle opener? Those kinds of things. But actually then what happens is that we can sometimes overlook the really deep emotional changes that we go through as parents. And we can sometimes miss out on the opportunities to really reset our relationship, because whether your child's going at 18 or 20 or 25 or later, this is a real opportunity to stand back, allow them to do what is developmentally right, which is to become an independent young adult. Obviously, not every child or young person can do that, but in the main, that's what they're developmentally meant to be doing. And for us as parents, it can sometimes feel really, really strange to do that. But if we can look at this through a fresh pair of eyes, see it as an opportunity, see it as an experiment as well. So if it doesn't quite go right, or it doesn't quite pan out like we hope, then maybe just we could take a different path and be curious about what's needed. Then there's a real opportunity, I think, for deeper connection and a different connection as our children become young adults.
We're going to talk about some of the practical stuff on the episode today, and the reset as well, which I think is really interesting. So we'll talk about that later on. But let's talk about the emotional side of things for you as a parent first. and how you can best prepare yourself for this big change for you and your family, your child going to university. How can you prepare? How did you prepare, maybe, if you prepared at all? I don't know.
I think I have my head firmly in the sand because I so wanted my daughter to kind of get back onto that track that her peers were on. And yet, actually, there are a huge number and multiple layers of emotion around this. There's obviously great pride for what your child might have achieved to get to university, but equally there's a lot of grief as well. And we talk about ambiguous loss, which is where it's not around death, but it's actually around change. So somebody might not be present anymore, but we can still feel their loss. And I think there's a huge amount for us as parents to kind of process. There's also the sense that maybe our role is now redundant. What do we do if it's our last child at home or our only child? What are we doing now? Where do we fit? And I think the opportunity for us is to allow that. I mentioned there earlier about the practical parenting pieces. I think this is, the emotional parenting pieces are as important. And, giving ourselves the space, being compassionate with ourselves, recognizing that we all feel like this. It's a natural, normal, typical way of feeling when our child is going to move on to any kind of different stage of life. That can be really, really helpful. But if we keep everything tightly laced, not only do we not benefit, and I think that can end up with us feeling that we're displaced and, we can end up with low mood and things like that, lots of anxiety around our child, but also our child can feed off of that. So how might we be that consistent and calm and present kind of partner in their experience? So it's not just about fixing this or making it all right. It is an experiment. And how can we embrace that as a family? Because even though our child might not be at home and we might not see them, we are still a part of that. And this 3 years or 4 years, depending, or maybe even more, depending on what course they're doing, will go by in a flash. They will either be home or not in a flash as well. So it's a real opportunity for us to reset and really start to think about some of the things maybe as parents we go, actually, this is something in our relationship I'd like to shift. I'd like to spend more time, or I'd like to do something different. And actually going to university is an opportunity for us as well to have that reset for us.
And you've touched on a range of emotions as well. There'll be all sorts going on in your head. Have you got any advice for balancing some of that?
I think allowing, first of all, you can grieve and feel a sense of loss, but you can also be joyful and happy and proud. So we can, we bounce around between these big emotions, but it is about allowing them. So finding somewhere that you can let those out safely, finding people that understand. There's lots and lots of communities online for parents whose children are going to university, but also finding friends who understand. Maybe it's a case of reconnecting with somebody who's going through something similar, but just getting it out, I think, is really important. But also recognizing that this is a temporal feeling. It will change and shift as, you go through the next stages. So when your child starts to settle, or they don't reply to a message because they were busy out with new friends, or they were finishing an assignment, or they send you something that says we're doing okay, then those feelings will change and morph. But if we don't allow them, then they can become really, really challenging for us. But also that interplay with our child changes as well, because they can start to worry that they've got to worry about us as well. And that shouldn't be the case, but it sometimes can be.
Let's talk about some of the practical stuff then, the tick box stuff that you've mentioned already, because there are costs, of course, associated with university, and planning financially can be a big shift for young people when they're going to university. As a parent, what can you do to help them with that?
Well, I think having conversations about anything that you're concerned about is a really key point. But if you're not a family that's had those conversations, then it can feel a little bit weird. But actually, this is a reset, as we've said a few times now. And so you can start to have different conversations, I think. And it might not be you, actually, that does that. Oftentimes young people might take something on board from, a family friend, or an uncle or an aunt, or, somebody that's in the kind of environment that isn't mum or dad. And so making sure those conversations take place is really important. And if financial literacy isn't something that maybe your child's had to, or isn't particularly interested in, then this is an opportunity as well. There'll be loads and loads of banks that will come to, the student union fairs and things, offering, accounts and whatever. And there's lots of apps now. It's a very, very kind of different landscape now financially for young people. But I think from a family perspective, I think it's about recognizing that, the limits of your own personal financial situation, they are what they are. So you don't have to, accommodate extra if you can't afford to. You have to agree what is going to be appropriate for you and your family. But also, one of the things that we didn't actually look into, but I know is really, really helpful for a lot of parents and young people, is things like scholarships and bursaries. They just weren't even on our radar at the time. But if you've got a young person who is particularly skilled in a specific academic or sporting or that sort of thing, then you might be able to get some kind of scholarship, or you might be able to go to either the university or a charity and get a bursary if you've got either low income or you are from a certain location. There's lots and lots of options there. But then obviously as well, there's young people going out and getting a job. And all of these points, looking after your own money, budgeting, understanding all of these, we have to allow our children to go through this, because this is how they'll learn and build upon these skills as they get older as well. So bit of a minefield, I think, for parents, but actually, it is an opportunity again. But again, just having those conversations, being open, and, if we don't know what the answers are, that's okay as well. We'll make our way through it together.
And I guess with all of that, it depends on your relationship as well, the sorts of conversations that you might have around finances and money and the way that you frame them too, as to what feels right for you.
Definitely, yeah. And I think that's the key with all of this, is that, it's a unique situation for your family and the dynamics in your family. So being able to have open conversations, and I think this comes back to the emotions. If we are consumed by the fear, the loss, the grief, all those other things, tempered by the joy and the delight, then it can make it really hard to see our child's perspective, because we're just literally looking through our own lens. So really it's important for us as parents to say, okay, I'm feeling this, I'm going to set it down, and then we can have really helpful conversations. But also, this isn't a one thing. We don't have to have all the conversations by the time term starts. We can continue to have them. So it might be that actually we say, well, let's, as I say, go on a little journey. Let's have an experiment for the first term and let's see where you land. But I think it's about recognising that this is hard and heavy for parents. It is a challenging time. All of these kinds of transitions need some support, and maybe it's about us giving ourselves a little bit more grace as we go through them.
Do you think there's any sort of key advice you should give your child before they leave for university, or maybe those essential items as well, a trip to the supermarket and stocking up on certain things?
It's so funny. I remember when my daughter went and I was told, the best thing you can do is, get there early on the day and then go and do a shop. And basically we got there early on the day and she said, okay, thanks, bye. And I was left standing there thinking, but we haven't done the shop. Like, we're meant to do the shop. Yeah. That's what we do. That's what you do. I've read it online. We all do the shop. I didn't do the shop. Have I failed? And actually, no, you've just got to be really responsive, I think, as a parent. And I think the key thing is for your child to know that whatever happens, you're there. So that sense of emotional safety, they can feel whatever they feel and you can hold that. And then that psychological safety, you can mess up, you can make mistakes. We expect you to, but it's fine. Whatever happens, we're here for you. And that doesn't have to be we're going to come in and financially rescue you or fix things, but it is that sense of we're still connected. We're just at the end of the phone and we want you to go off. We want you to have an amazing experience. And we understand that it might not always feel amazing. So we're there for the good and the not so good.
And then it's all about settling in. And that's the next step then, which is less easy than maybe it sounds. What do you think some of the common challenges are for students when they're settling in that first month, that first term?
Well, I think as a parent, there's this fear, isn't there? There's a fear that they're not going to make friends, that they're not going to succeed, they're going to be isolated. And what you see in that first week or two or the first month, and we mentioned earlier on that most people say, you can't allow your child to come home in that first month. And with my daughter, we said, we'll do university your way. So whatever you need to do to make this work for you, we'll do it your way. And she actually came home, I think, in the first week, but then she went back again. So I think it's about looking at all of the advice that you'll get. And for most young people, that's really good advice. Get them to stick it out for the month, but also you know your child best. So what does your child need to make this experience right for them? And I think for us as parents, that first week, busy yourself. Find things to do. Maybe not go on a, round the world cruise, but find things to do. Keep yourself busy, not looking at your phone every 5 minutes. Have they texted? Are they okay? And trying to get your mind off of the fact that this is a whole new experience for them, but it's also a whole new experience for you. And I think one of the best bits of advice I ever got given was to buy them a doorstop, because that means the door can be open. So if you're in halls of residence, they've all got fire doors. So if you, sorry, this is health and safety, like anti-health and safety here, but buy a doorstop, because if you're in your room, you can open the door, and then as people come past, you start to see them and chat and whatever else. But I think, again, for parents, it's about not fixing, it's about allowing, and also, knowing when it's the right time to step back. This is their experience and you're facilitating it, but it's not your experience. That's somewhere else at home.
And how do you do that, though? Because you're right, it's about them growing up, it's about them, becoming adults and moving on, and you will want to support that as a parent, but not intervene too much. And there's a line somewhere. So how do you find where that line is and how that's right for you?
I think it's a bit of trial and error, actually. And I think this is where that compassion comes in, which is we all mess up. I've done things that, turned up at stuff because I thought it would be helpful. And it really isn't. It's actually quite embarrassing, Mum. Could you please leave now? I mean, that only happened once, granted. But I think there's a sense of we've got to give ourselves some compassion. We're doing this potentially for the first time. And we're learning as well. So we have to be led by our child, though. I think the challenge for us is a lot of the fears that kind of perpetuate in our minds when our child isn't at home, and they can lead our behaviour. So it's really about, as we said before, finding these places where you can set down how you're feeling. Finding a safe person who you can say, I'm really worried about this, and they can, just get it out of your head, because generally, there's a lot of support services in universities. It might be challenging for your young person to go and access those, but actually, if you can try and keep the communication open, that's the best thing that you can do. So it is a challenge. It really is a challenge, but I think it's step by step, one day at a time. Just see where you end up, and I think most people will get through this really, really well.
And it can be really hard, right? We've talked about a lot of different things which your child will be trying to overcome and get to grips with, social, financially, whatever it is. And then you're at home wondering how they're getting on, trying not to be too intrusive. How do you manage all of that?
Well, I think you have the conversations before they actually go to university, maybe about what might or might not happen. So actually, is it healthy for us to have a weekly call? Your child might not know. Is it good that we have, I don't know, like an emoji? My daughter and I had an emoji when she was younger, which was, I'm struggling, I'm in need of help. So, you know that you can go in without having to say the words. But it's about having that conversation and also recognizing that actually, it will change. The first couple of weeks of the first term versus the third term, they're completely different. So actually, responding to our child's needs, but also managing our emotions as we go through that. So maybe just making sure that we are very aware of the fact we're missing them. It's okay to miss them. It really is. It's okay. I mean, when my daughter went to university, I came home, cleared out her bedroom, and just cried for about 2 hours, just cleaning. I mean, maybe that's what it was. It was the cleaning that I was crying out, wasn't? No, I was just missing her, really, really missing her. But it's really allowing this, but also recognizing that, what we want to do here is we want to scaffold our child. We don't want to fix them. So we don't want to fix this. There's no perfect university experience. It is theirs to really to take on board and to learn in their own way and grow in their own way and develop in their own way. And being able to say to them, I'm here, but, we're not fixing. So if you need help, then I'm here. If you've made a mistake and you need somebody to talk, there's no judgment. It's about really resetting, not into a peer-to-peer relationship, but actually just looking at our child and saying, you're growing, you're developing, and it's hard for them, it's hard for us. But maybe just, I think communication is just so key. When they go, and also listening to ourselves. What do we need?
Yeah, and if you use that word reset a lot, actually, it's a bit of a reset there for your relationship with your child. What do you mean by that? How does that all work?
Well, I think, being around a lot of parents and having gone through it myself, it almost feels like the university offer and that day when you move in is the day where you start to judge your 18 plus years of parenting, which is, I've got here now. It's not necessarily that it's, my parenting stops, but I'm going to judge because, they don't know how to make bolognese sauce. They can't, manage their finances necessarily. It doesn't come naturally to them. So we can really judge ourselves when it comes to that. So what I think university can be for us as parents is a bit of a reset. So we can look at that and go, okay, well, it is an experiment. I'm going to see what's missing. but I'm also going to celebrate the things that I've done really, really well, because the fact that your child is going to university is an amazing landmark for you to celebrate too. But it can be a reset for your relationship if you've not necessarily, been as close. Maybe the pressure of exams, other life events has changed your relationship. Then actually that distance can often be a real positive to your relationship. And then I think for us in midlife as well, generally in midlife, it's a reset for us too, because we've been doing this parenting thing for a while, and actually this is an opportunity maybe for us to return to some of the things that we like as well, and also showing them that we're not just waiting on them to succeed for us to feel like we've been a good parent. We've been a good parent, we've been a good enough parent, and that's all we can be. But I think the reset takes some of the pressure off, which says, okay, well, we're not going to continue, because I think there's a lot of not necessarily misunderstanding, but there's a perception that your child will continue to, if they've been top of their school, for example, or really accomplished in something, you're going into a much bigger pool in university. So things are going to change and shift. So if we approach this as a reset, where we don't take those past expectations in, it makes it easier on our child because they can just be who they are, and it makes it easier on us as well. So an opportunity, I think.
And it's a transition for the whole family as well, isn't it? Because there may be siblings, there may be other family members. So it's a shift for everyone involved.
It really is. And every transition, I always say every transition needs support. And I think this does as well. But I think I certainly did, focus on the fact that it's just you're going to university and that's the big win. But actually, there's a lot going on under the surface, practically, emotionally, and socially. So just being really patient with ourselves, crying when you're cleaning their bedroom once they've gone, or not, as the case may be, but finding ways that you can get through this and just taking it a day or a week or a term at a time and seeing where you end up.
We've talked a bit about how you stay in touch and not be overbearing, but maintaining that relationship and how you strike that balance. Would you have any top tip for other parents who are trying to work out what's right for them?
Well, I think it's about looking at your existing relationship and what works, but I think it's also about asking your child, what do they think at the moment? And, taking the pressure off. You don't have to have a prescriptive answer that we will set in stone and that will be it. But what might work for you? Or shall we kind of regroup after a few weeks and see what works and just play it by ear? But I'd really encourage them to lead, because this is an amazing opportunity for them to start to take those first steps into proper, independent living and stuff like that. But also just setting the judgment down. It doesn't matter if they literally eat cold baked beans for a whole term. I mean, it possibly will. If you're a nutritionist, you might disagree with me, but there are tolerances that we as parents can allow our child to do, and they should do these things. They should go off and make mistakes and learn things, and and that's really, really important. But that takes a different perspective from parents as well. So I think it's about recognition that this is an opportunity. It's okay. They will be okay. And so will the parents as well. But it just takes a bit of time.
You shared a little bit of your story on the episode today and a little bit of the story of your daughter. For someone listening to this or watching this who may have a child who's particularly vulnerable, would you have any advice or support for them?
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's a really fine line, because vulnerability and how we determine that is, unique to the individual. I would definitely, if possible, speak to the university, because they've got student support services that may be able to help, but also applying for DSA, which can offer some extra support, whether it's depending on what the disability or the need is. So mental health can come under that. If you've got a condition that lasts, I think it's for 12 months or more, then you'll come under that as well. But starting to look and not looking at these things as negatives, they're really there to encourage and support the experience of why your child's there. And I think sometimes for parents, we do like to fix as parents. So, it can feel good to know that you've done all of that. You've gone and got all of the support that you possibly can for your child. But also just keeping that communication open and having plans as well. What happens when? And if you know that certain things are going to happen, whether it's running out of medication or signing on with a doctor or those kinds of things, it's just maybe starting to consider those things beforehand and knowing that your child might not want to talk about it before they go. But actually, if you've got that plan in place or you've tried to have that conversation, then that can make you all feel a little bit more prepared when something doesn't quite go right.
Can I ask you how your daughter is now, by the
Yeah,
way?
she's great. Yeah,
good.
she's what is she? How old is she? 24, I think. Yeah, nearly 24. So yeah, she's doing really, really well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your story with us on the podcast today. I know there are lots of resources available on the UCAS website when it comes to support for yourself and how you deal with that and that relationship and that changing relationship with your child. But where are some other brilliant resources that might help you out?
So I founded Parenting Mental Health, which is a charity that supports parents of young people and children with mental health challenges, and also my book, Never Let Go, How to Parent Your Child Through Mental Illness, which sounds a little extreme, but actually it's just a really compassionate account of our experience and also the partnering, not parenting approach that I devised to support my daughter through her mental health challenges.
Well, Suzanne, thanks again for joining me on the podcast today. Really nice to meet you.
Thanks, John.
And thanks to you as well for joining us for this edition of the Parents Podcast. Some brilliant advice on how to deal with that changing relationship as your child goes off and does something really exciting and steps into the world of being an adult at university. I do hope you'll join us again next time, and thank you very much for joining us.
Stay informed with expert advice straight to your inbox. Sign up now for key updates, deadlines and guidance to help you support your young person with confidence.